right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So today my guest is Mr. William Glass. He is head of the Millennial Debt Foundation, and we're going to talk about what that means. And we're gonna give a few people a hard time. I think starting with the boomers. How are you, brother?
I'm doing well, and just to clarify for your audience, I'm the policy director of MDF, but I am not the head of it.
Okay, all
You
right.
you couldn't pay me enough to run a nonprofit in this day and age.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm familiar with that. Hey, so you and I met in Nashville in a little speakeasy at
Yep.
an Alder event, and
Yes.
started talking about this subject that I love, which there's some I think appropriate generational tension that's going on right now, and it's been some of the like funnest tweets I've had recently are jumping on boomers for the debt legacy and some of the
Yeah.
bad policy that they did that has definitely saddled their future generations and their grandkids with a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Well, when you do that, of course, they've got an issue, and two things can be true. They're in my day I had to walk uphill in the snow both ways, and and you guys are so lazy and all this stuff. But two things can be true. We can have some, let's call it entitled lazy people in a generation, but we can also have a generation that is absolutely mismanaged what was essentially built by their grandfathers and fathers.
Yeah.
And the boomers are directly responsible for massive hangover that we have right now, and they are responsible for massive debt, and they're
Sure.
responsible for things that are really harming us today, and I see really zero accountability whatsoever. And it's funny because they'll talk about the problems that they have today or the problems that we're facing politically, but they aren't owning the fact that they built a lot of this stuff into the system, and they elected a lot of these knuckleheads that are doing this raping and pillaging of our treasury.
Yeah, that's a characteristically Bryce Eddy understatement. Just not putting any sauce on that at all. Just the plain truth. Yeah, I think it is interesting. It's ironic, I think, that you use the word entitled to talk about how boomers talk about maybe generations that come after them. And the irony of that, of course, is that the boomers in terms of actual numbers and math, the baby boomers are the most entitled generation in the history of the world. What I mean by that is they are the recipients of federal spending programs that take up the proportion of the federal government resources that they take up as a generation vastly outweighs the contribution of that generation to the federal treasury. And so, I mean, and those expenditures, those expenses that they receive primarily through our old age spending programs, they receive them by entitlement. I mean, what that means literally is the law says you're entitled to this if you meet the specification of being a certain age. You're entitled to this, and that happens every year on autopilot, and nobody votes for it. It's a part of the federal budget that nobody has to vote for. It's. I mean, in a way, it's genius. But but if you wanted to make sure that congressional money kept coming to you, you couldn't really imagine something better than creating a scenario where Congress never has to vote on it. Because the one thing that people in Congress fear more than anything is to put their name on something. And so if you just make it so no one ever has to face the music for voting for it, you created a situation, nominally at least, without accountability. And so you get to receive, and nobody has to be responsible for giving it. And I'll just it's a scary thing, and because of course I'm the child of boomers. Most of us are children of boomers. Those it's few and far between that anybody has living parents of an older generation than that anymore. Most of us are who have living parents are children of boomers, and I'm grateful for them. I mean, I'm grateful for what my mother taught me. I'm grateful for the work ethic she taught me. And this goes to your point that two things can be true. It's certainly true that people can have themselves kind of an individualized sense of like a work ethic and taking care of people. But when it comes to like the sorts of policies that they vote for, when it comes to the leaders that they have characteristically voted for, they have voted for people who said, I will maximize what the federal treasury gives you. And that, unfortunately, it in terms of the structural weight of the economy, vastly outweighs practically every good thing, because the nation faces a massively existential threat, like an iceberg in front of the Titanic, $37 trillion in debt, more than $1 trillion in interest payments. That's assuming that the interest rates don't go up. Those are things that threaten to undermine the prosperity of every generation that follows them. And so, in some ways, the wonderful things about them are outweighed by this unfortunate failure to imagine what the consequences would be of electing people who made promises to them instead of procuring the future and prosperity for their children.
Yeah, for sure. And these subjects aren't things that you can even talk about, right? You cannot have a conversation about how Social Security is, bankrupt. It's a Ponzi scheme. Eventually it's going to run out, right? It
Right.
it really has already run out. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
We don't have enough, young people coming up to pay for, this whole entire generation and what those entitlements amount to.
Yeah.
We know that it's a terrible system in terms of what the returns and how that money actually really, is invested, because, it's not in, it's not actually invested. It's something that has been corrupted over time, and you cannot bring up any kind of talk about reforming the system at all with this generation. Now, at the same time, they're all railing, at the TV and at the politicians for the state of things, but they're not willing to suggest that they're part of the problem, or that, we better fix this thing in a hurry, or nobody in future generations is going to have everything. I mean, we're heading to collapse.
Right. It is unfortunate. I'll just say, every working economic model of the future of the United States, every single one, um, there are no assumptions that are that are at all consistent with reality in terms of like what we actually face looking forward that can yield a predictable result at all. Now, what I mean by that is, so for example, like the Wharton College of Business in the University of Pennsylvania, they publish every year a very famous economic model. And when you plug in the assumptions of interest rates being what they currently are, labor force participation in the future, what it will likely be, what is likely to be the net draw on inflation, what could happen, with the $100 trillion that we are set to borrow over the next 30 years to fund our old age entitlement programs. When you add all those things together, the model basically gives up, is what I'm saying. And so what I mean is, unfortunately, nobody can tell you exactly what we're headed for because the things we use to tell us what we're headed for don't know how to compute the size and scale and scope of the problem that we're facing. Now, my thing is, look, I'll say this, if I were in the position of people of people who grew up in the baby boomer generation, I would almost certainly have made the same decisions, right? I think that like part of what makes this sting is it feels like you're sort of making a moral accusation. And actually what it is in some ways that generation, uh, they they were kind of sold a bill of goods from their leaders who basically banked on them not knowing anything.
Yeah.
And so it isn't like,
They
I mean, the
weaponize
idea that
their
like,
ignorance is what they
yes,
did.
that's exactly right. And frankly, they're extremely powerful special interests that exist to continue to make sure that that ignorance and that ignorance continues to exist and that it continues to be weaponized in the same way. So that's not anyone's fault except for the people who are doing it. But that's, I mean, and those people should probably be thrown, right into the Grand Canyon. But short of that, I think that's not anyone's fault. What is though? But the thing is, let's like facing reality. we have no idea how to guess at what is coming to us, and it is almost certainly the case that that Congress will put off doing things about this problem until the moment they can't do it anymore. And you, as you pointed out, the problem is already, it's not tomorrow's problem, it's today's problem. In 1950, there were 16 workers for every single Social Security beneficiary. And today, there are 2.7 and falling.
Mm.
That's that's 5 times smaller the the tax base on which to rest the program. At the exact same time that 10,000 people every single day retire and age into these programs. The boomers, because their parents had a lot to celebrate, are the biggest generation in American history, and they're all hitting the moment where they age into these programs at about the same time. Meanwhile, the population is decreasing, the workforce is decreasing. So there's just not the money to fund it in the way that we funded it before. Now, the problem is of that is that the government made these people and their ancestors and their descendants a promise, but the government can no longer keep that promise. And so what we as a society have to figure out how to do is how to guard the future, and at the same time to make sure that these programs exist for the people who absolutely need them the most. Because the dirty secret about all of this is that the people who are aging into these programs constitute as a group, not individuals, but constitute as a group, the wealthiest generation in the history of the world.
Yeah, and that has to be taken into consideration here. Like what we need is people to understand what the issue is and bite the bullet a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, there's ways, and I'm sure you guys have thought about it, and I want to hear your prescription, but there's ways for us to shift this system to something that's more sustainable.
Yeah.
Just moving the retirement age is one of those things.
Yeah.
When this whole program was originally conceived,
Yeah.
people just weren't living that long. People weren't expected to live as long as they are. Plus, that they live this sort of like horrible life that's sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
descending. It's
Yes.
in endless medical issues and things like that, because
Yes.
we're just through science and through medical interventions and technology, we can keep people alive that would have been dead in previous
Long after their
generations.
time.
Correct. Correct. And all of the tables were built upon, all of the projections were built upon,
Yeah.
people living for a few years after retirement, not another
Yeah.
40. And
Yeah.
yet that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's correct. I think so. Just, I mean, and just to, by the way, I just want to say my Twitter handle is under my name here. So all the people who hear this and just want to flame somebody, I just want to say, like, Bryce is not responsible for the things that I say. So come yell at me person to person, and maybe we can have a meaningful conversation about this.
Well, I
And I'll,
love conflict, so come after me. It's fun. And
I know
and
you,
I the other day I was being hammered by both sides, just
yeah,
and I'm like, hey, listen, I'm sandwiched in the middle of you knuckleheads.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
One of the biggest, most famous bear pokers in the world is Bryce Eddy. So, maybe you should just stay and flame him. But if you want to come talk to me, I'd be glad to talk with anybody about this, because I think the whole thing is that there's a number of myths that there have been, like, really powerful special interests arrayed to make sure that you continue to believe. The first of which is, and I mean, anytime you talk about these entitlement programs, what you immediately hear is that is my money.
Mhm.
And I will concede that that is the way the program is often sold. But in actual fact, that is not the case for two reasons. One, when it comes to things like Social Security, as most people, as you know, it's the workers today paying for today's retirees. And the contract is that when the time comes, the workers of tomorrow will pay for me. That's the promise that America made. And it's a beautiful promise. I mean, I have to say, it just is, it's an absolutely gorgeous thing for a country to say, that we care enough about our old people. We care enough that people should age with dignity, and that they shouldn't be thrown into the scrap heap of history just because their body stopped working as well as it did when they were 30. That we're going to ensure that part of the public provision is to make sure that people who need it have it. Now, the problem is nobody can see the future. And so there's a certain extent to which, like, um, we made the kind of promise that people make when they promise for richer, for poorer, but we didn't plan well enough on for poorer,
Mhm.
because the people coming after just frankly can't support it. And so these programs are a huge draw on the public. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, as you pointed out a moment ago, Bryce, when the Social Security Act was passed, the average life expectancy of an adult male in this country was 58 years old. And that life expectancy is now in the 70s. So I mean, that's by the time the average, not just a few, but the average Social Security and Medicare recipient, by the time they die today, I mean, it's a horrible thing to talk about this way, because it is terrible that we just don't live forever. But by the time they die, the average will have taken 33% more from these programs than they ever contributed to them. And that's it. So in a sense, it's not your money. I
Right.
mean, even if you insist, which I think is, given the way the programs are structured, that every dollar you put in, you should get out. Even if you insist on that, it's still the case that for the vast majority of recipients of these programs, they're receiving far more than they put in, which means that the program is structurally lopsided. It's guaranteed to fail, and um, we're seeing that in real time. And so you're watching as we now careen past $37 trillion in debt, and bond yields are exploding, and credit agencies are sounding the alarm, and central banks all over the world are divesting from dollars and buying gold instead. I mean, it's crazy. Who would have thought that we'd achieve the place in history where central banks are doing now what like weirdo advertisers were telling them to do on the Neil Bortz show 20 years ago? It's like the thing is flipping, is starting to show the cracks, and we have a limited time in which to make some sense of it and do some things. And the thing is, we don't have to destroy everyone's life in order to fix it, but we do have to make decisions quickly, and we do have to be decisive and clear about what the priorities are. And I would say that those should be prioritizing the people who are in the most need, and for people who have done exceptionally well, to say like, hey, look, the cost of a country that functions is that the people who can bear that cost of that country the best bear the most. And most Americans agree to that. Even if you disagree on like where those numbers and ratios fall, most Americans agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a model for us to, care for one another, all that stuff. I mean, I believe that that comes on down to the smallest form of government first, which is the family. I think that comes down to the individual, planning for their future and all those sort of
Yeah.
things. But for people that cannot, or for people who are incapable, let's say, and I don't mean just that they're not good at it, but I mean people who are incapable of caring for themselves. There is a place for us in society to take care of those things. But I think largely, it needs to be not a state function first, but a, charity and community function first.
Yeah.
And we've gotten so far away from any of these principles, and people that will preach that because they believe that from, let's say, a conservative standpoint, they're some of the loudest people in regards to making any reforms of this system, or even accepting the reality that it's broken and
Yeah.
beyond real repair. My, I, I, I think the real concern here is, it was conceived from my perspective. It was ill conceived by people who believed in, more of a socialist, communist approach and ideal in terms of the politicians that crafted this. But it was swallowed hook, line, and sinker, like you mentioned earlier, by people that thought, well, okay, they're going to give me something, and yeah, sure, we can go for this because, it sounds nice. We're going to have this public safety net for people. And
Yeah.
I love that you point out the truth there, that it is not their money, because, if you'd put that same money in an investment, I'm sure you guys have done some of these studies, and maybe you can expand on it. But, if you put that same money in another savings vehicle that actually has real returns and things like that, then it would be your money. and then it would
Yeah.
actually have a yield and a return that could probably deliver you back your money plus a lot of profit. What, have you guys done those studies, and do you have some of those numbers for us?
We haven't, only because so many other people have. I mean, I think that's that's a conversation that I think was especially popular, back in the days of the Tea Party. The idea
Sure.
that, like, if we eliminated the Social Security tax and just let everybody, like, invest that money, and of course, like, we're not. I doubt that I'm going to be so persuasive as a conversation partner with you, Bryce, that all the people who have up until now been convinced that the government would do a better job of that than people would will be suddenly be convinced to the other side. But I think what we are in a place to say conclusively is that the government has done a pretty terrible job of it. Whatever would have happened otherwise, the government's done a terrible job. And I
Sure.
think that for me, it's less like I'm less driven by. I mean, I think for me, I'm more kind of compelled by the pragmatic reality of the situation we're in right now, which is, yes, might we have gone a different way at many points along the way? I think for sure we could have. But what in actual fact has happened is this. And what that is that we are $37 trillion in debt. Our debt to GDP is the highest it's been since World War II, and it's not coming down.
Yeah.
We're set to be, by my best math, and you can, if you want to know more about that math, you can go to millennialdebt.org and see our policy booklet, which explains how we're doing the work we're doing. You can go look and see that we're counting on generously. I mean, this is assuming no major interest rate changes, no major foreign wars, a lot of things that are probably not that, like, realistic to assume, but assuming the most rosy scenario that we can assume, we're still looking at 200% debt to GDP 30 years from now.
Yeah.
And
Well,
when the world's leading economy runs itself the way Japan runs itself, we're going to see shocks that make terrible things happen the world over. But the worst part by far, and this is why I'm involved in it, in this work, is that there's only so much credit in the economy. There's only so much money in the economy, unless you're willing to print so much money that you make your money worthless. There's only so much of this. And for all of it that the government sucks up, not just by taxing or something like that, but by its own inability to live within its means, the more government sucks up, the less there is for everyone else, which means less
yep.
opportunity for kids, less opportunity for entrepreneurship, less opportunity for new ideas, for innovation, for the things that we need to solve our absolutely real problems. Those things get crippled by the inability of government to live with its means. Now, I wish it were so that the government, $37 trillion of debt, was the government investing in tomorrow. It is not.
No.
$37 trillion of debt is to pay for yesterday. The $1 trillion+ or so that we spend on, that we're going to spend over the next 12 months on interest, they're paying for yesterday. None of that is going into forward-thinking investments. I don't hate debt. I'm not a debt fundamentalist. I just think that if we're going to take debt out, we should take debt out the way normal people take debt out, which is as a gamble on a better future.
Yeah.
But if you're taking out debt to pay for yesterday's consumer decisions, then you're entering into a spiral that far too many Americans already know intimately. And if they think they know it now, when their country joins them in that spiral, they're going to they're going to learn a very, very painful lesson. And they won't have anyone to blame except for the people that we sent to office, and therefore us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right. Well, tell me about what you guys are doing as an organization, and tell me about, what solutions do we have?
Yeah. So I'll just say, just to encourage your audience, if I may, there is no shortage of good ideas. We are one organization working on this issue. There are several others that I think. So I'll shout us out, of course, but I'll shout out others. So Millennial Debt Foundation, you can find out everything that we do, including the 10 common sense policy recommendations that we have, at millennialdebt.org. And it's a little book called What We Owe the Future, which is sort of a 10 commandments, if you will, of how the government can turn this ship around. Our goal in this booklet isn't to pay down the debt. That's probably not realistic. It's how can we stabilize the debt at roughly 100% debt to GDP, which is probably not great still, because you're still dealing with, like, there are already effects, like at 100% debt to GDP, you're already kind of threatening your economy a little bit, but it's like a compromise between, like, what we would like to see, and what's probably feasible. And there are some, none of the proposals in this book, and all of them together, don't fundamentally change the social contract. They nibble at the edges, and they make fundamental the most important thing they do is they make small changes while there's still time to make them,
Yeah.
before the vast majority of boomers are already recipients who would have to be grandfathered into any future changes, before the trust funds run out and they're automatically 30% cuts across the board, or 20%, or whatever it is, most recently. So like those things are like, that's what we do. But there's tons. I mean, the thing is that this is an utterly unremarkable book in one way. Uh, Everybody else has written one too. you know,
Yeah.
um, Cato has a great set of recommendations. Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which is bipartisan for those of your listeners who are more left leaning. They've got a great set of recommendations. Jessica Riedel publishes every single year from the Manhattan Institute a set of recommendations that basically get updated to point out like where we're going and what sort of changes might get us there. The point is, everybody basically agrees that if we make small changes now, we can do it. We can probably stabilize the debt in a way that like doesn't have to destroy everybody's life. But the thing is, it requires changes that are very unpopular with certain special interest groups. So, for example, raising the retirement age by 2 years and then indexing it to life expectancy. That's a very small change. Now, if you're 65 and broke, that's a terrible change.
Right.
But in our plan, just like many others, and I just want to destroy some myths here. This plan, just like most plans, um, doesn't mean taking grandma, as they used to say about Paul Ryan, and throwing her off a cliff. We're talking about that most of these plans have exception clauses for people who are like destitute. Most of these plans grandfather in all existing beneficiaries. Most of these plans, they make these changes for people who are not yet in the point of considering them.
Yeah.
And yet, the AARP is so concerned that anybody should ever raise this issue as a question that they will destroy every politician who even mentions raising the age by 2 years, in spite of the fact that the life expectancy has raised by 20 years.
Yeah.
That is an absolute scam.
Well, and the AARP and some of those organizations are extremely left wing. I mean, they really are, which is no surprise why they come against people for that, because they do believe that it's the state's responsibility. I mean, just fundamentally, that's their position. Um, but but yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
cannot even discuss this without people, hair on fire, screaming at you, and or trying to
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
ruin your candidacy if you're running for a political office. But this bill is coming due, and it really
Yeah.
is small and minor changes that will not affect
Yeah.
anybody. And there are things that you could put out in a 5-year time horizon. Okay, in 5 years this is what's happening. You could set those things in
Yeah.
law now that don't capture
Yeah.
everybody with a great big butterfly net, but does leave room for
Yeah.
exceptions and things like that. But if we don't, I mean, gosh, we're heading for that proverbial iceberg, and we're coming at it breakneck
Yeah.
speed, and we better figure out how to
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah, it's otherwise, I'm reminded, as I often am, of the words of Alexis de Tocqueville, who said that the U.S. Republic will endure for as long as it takes for people to realize that you can bribe people with the people's money.
Yeah, or
That's
vote.
and so it is an like
Yeah, vote money out of the treasury, which is what they've been doing. As soon as they
exactly.
figured out they could just bribe people with their own money. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
but I think I should say, with all this, I think the United States has a tremendous record of putting off decisions to the very last moment possible, and then making them incredibly decisively. I mean, we entered World War II by the skin of our teeth, and then when we did, we did.
Right.
And I think so I think there is still a case, I think, for hope that there will come a day uh, when Congress will have to address this. And the point is not to say, like, I mean, I don't think the country is doomed to destruction. Though honestly, that's within the realm of possibility. I think that people will act decisively when they have to. But the thing is, every day that's delayed makes that action, whenever it finally does happen, more difficult to do, more costly to do, more painful to do. And actually, the forward thinking approach to this is the one that's kinder. It's the one that's more gentle to the people who least can afford to have their lives thrown upside down. I wasn't, and I know Bryce, you share a lot of this story as well. But I mean, I tell people all the time, my life story is hillbilly elegy without the hills. I was born and raised in Central Florida, in the trailer park capital of the world, between a meth lab back in the '90s when we weren't good at cooking meth yet, and a brothel on the other side. And so I have nothing but sympathy and empathy for, and a desire to care for the people in this country
Amen.
who have fallen on hard times and gotten bad luck. Not only do I want to, they're my family members. Of course I care about them. Of course I care about these programs. We were, when I was growing up, we received the government dole through the free lunch program, without which there were tons and tons of years where we wouldn't have eaten,
Yeah,
except for at school. So I believe in these programs, and it's precisely because I believe in them that we absolutely must reform them.
I agree. I
Right now,
agree.
like, I've gotten to the stage in my life where nobody, I like I nobody should offer me money when I've thank God I've done okay. And so nobody should be offering me money when I turn 63. And if I was told that the cost of keeping the country out of ruin, and the cost of providing opportunity for my children and for other people's children, is that I would have to forego some of that, even though technically I'm entitled to it, I would say yes twice.
Yeah, well, I wish more people than just you and I took that tactic. I wish the people who authored some of this stuff and ushered in so much of the debt and ushered in and voted for the politicians that have fleeced us. I wish those folks looked at it the same way, and I'm afraid most of them do not, at least in my experience, and that's
Yep.
frustrating. So how can we help you guys? How can we follow you guys?
Yeah,
Give us
I
all
think.
that in the 2 minutes here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think. First of all, follow us at millennialdebt.org, and we'd love to get to know you. You can email us there. I've left my Twitter handle here so that people can come argue with me on Twitter if they wish. We also host a podcast, and I wanted to say real quick before we cut off here. I interviewed a hopeful a couple days ago on our podcast, which is Gross Domestic Problem. That's what you see, GDP Cast. I interviewed a hopeful for the U.S. Senate a couple of days ago, and we were talking. And I said to him, when I've been working with Congress for the last 3 years now, and two things have happened that are surprising. Before I did it, I probably had an overly I would say I had a romantic view of Congress as an institution, and a very low view of individual Congress people and senators. And over the 3 years of working in Congress, that has mostly flipped.
Yeah,
I actually think that most of our lawmakers are good people who want to do the right thing. Most of them are. Of course, you always have blowhards in every group of people of
for sure.
sufficient size, but most of them want to. The incentives inside their world are the most difficult thing. And so, what they need more than anything is political cover from people who honestly and courageously tell them that they have their back. And so, the best thing that I think people can do, is follow people like us at millennialdebt.org, follow Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget, follow the Manhattan Institute, find out who the people are who are giving good education about this, and then one person to one person. It's amazing how well this will work. But person to person in your community of friends, don't allow these things to be caricatured. Tell the truth about them, because if enough of us know the truth about it, then it's impossible for people to come out to threaten our Congress people and our senators to take their jobs if they won't vote against what they know is good for the interests of the country. So follow us, please. But more importantly than that, I would just say the resources are abundant. Get educated, and then insist in the kindest way you can on having conversations with people around you that don't allow for like cheap caricatures from people who don't really care that much about the future of this country, but they only care about today's vote. Don't allow those people to take the truth from you.
Yeah, yeah, great advice. Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us and what you guys are
Yeah.
doing. To God be the glory, and we are out.
Yes. Thanks, Bryce.
Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.